claim. And Hume actually says in his argument, it doesn't even matter how credible the witness is. If they're claiming some kind of miracle, it is more reasonable every time to reject it than accept it. Why? Well, he says because the natural laws are so uniform and miracles are so improbable. Let me remind you of something. The definition of a miracle is a highly improbable event that violates the consistent natural laws. In other words, if you can't see it, Hume's argument isn't an argument at all. It's just circular reasoning that's begging the question. You could restate fairly Hume's argument like this: miracles do not exist because if they did, they would be miracles. This last Sunday was Easter Sunday, when we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. But for many people, they're just wondering, is the resurrection reasonable? 2,000 years ago, a Jewish carpenter from Nazareth actually dying on a Roman cross, being buried in a tomb, and coming back to life. Is that something that we can believe in? At Metachurch, where I'm the lead pastor, I've been going through a series called Investigating Easter. You can find that at youtube.com/Metachurch. And we've been making a cumulative case for why you can reasonably put your faith in Christ. The first thing you need to understand is the call to faith is not the call to blind faith. In fact, the Greek word pistis, where we get our word faith, it never means blindly believing something like a fairy tale. It actually implies reason behind the faith that you have. And so I want to go through kind of a cumulative case I've been making over the last several weeks. If you want to see all of it, again, youtube.com/Metachurch. I think there's some good reasons that you can put your faith in the resurrection and ultimately put your faith in Jesus. I'm going to get to 3 reasons, I think. But first, I want to do a little bit of background work. The first question we have to ask is whether or not miracles are possible. The resurrection is a miracle. And so if miracles are not possible, then there cannot be a resurrection. We started making this case from cosmology. What we found from Einstein's theory of relativity, Edwin Hubble's telescope, is that at one point, the world exploded into existence from nothing. And we know that because we can still trace the radiation blast from the Big Bang at the outer edges of our universe, and it is still expanding to this day, which means if you rewound the tape on that, at some point, it would in fact run out of tape. Now, all kinds of scientists, and I've had people in the comments before say, well, we don't really mean nothing. There was still something. There was some kind of, heat wave, atomic particles. But that just gets you back to the same problem of infinite regress. Like, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Regardless of the fact that the idea of anything being infinite and time-bound and infinite is very difficult. So Stephen Hawking says almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang, an actual beginning, which means they didn't exist and now they exist. So what does that mean? It means that there was no time, there was no space, and there was no matter. Scientist Rupert Sheldrake said this: it's almost as if science said, give me one free miracle, and from there, the entire thing will proceed with a seamless causal explanation. In other words, if you give me the one miracle of the entire universe coming into existence out of nothing, no time, no space, no matter, and the entire gigantic universe comes into existence, if you give me that one free miracle, I can then use the scientific process to explain everything else. He goes on and says, the one free miracle was the sudden appearance of all the matter and energy in the universe with all the laws that govern it, cosmology and teleology. Where did the universe come from? Why is there something instead of nothing? And teleology, the fine tuning of the universe with all of our natural laws and the physical laws. So all that to say, even the atheist has a real problem with how all of this got here. The best scientific data we have over 600 years since the Enlightenment tells us that at one point there was no space, time, or matter. Now, atheist scientists and philosophers have gone to great lengths and shot way past Occam's razor in order to posit theories that have no empirical proof and no actual data to support them, that nothing doesn't really mean nothing, or that we're actually in an endless loop of multiverses, or even things as wild as the panspermia, that there are some kind of aliens that are seeding the universe. But what makes the most sense is if there was no space, time, or matter, then there had to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial being who was all powerful and personal because they made a decision to go from a state of nothing to creating the universe, who put it all into existence. Regardless, that is a miracle. What is a miracle? A miracle is a highly improbable event that violates the consistent natural laws that govern our universe. Now, some philosophers have said that miracles are simply impossible. The most well-known argument against miracles comes from David Hume. This is such a powerful argument, atheists believe, that most atheists won't even deal with miracles in any meaningful way. They'll just say, Hume solved that problem for us in the 18th century. So here is Hume's argument. He said, the uniformity of natural laws and the inherent improbability of miracles make it more reasonable to reject miracle claims than to accept them. So anytime you get a miracle claim, and Hume actually says in his argument, it doesn't even matter how credible the witness is. If they're claiming some kind of miracle, it is more reasonable every time to reject it than accept it. Why? Well, he says because the natural laws are so uniform and miracles are so improbable. Let me remind you of something. The definition of a miracle is a highly improbable event that violates the consistent natural laws. In other words, if you can't see it, Hume's argument isn't an argument at all. It's just circular reasoning that's begging the question. You could restate fairly Hume's argument like this. Miracles do not exist because if they did, they would be miracles. Circular arguments are not arguments at all. They are just asserting something without providing any proof behind them. Yes, miracles are highly improbable. That's what makes them miraculous. Yes, miracles defy the laws of nature. That's part of their defining characteristics. However, there has been no philosophical bulletproof argument to show that miracles are impossible, only that they're improbable, which defines them as miracles. Besides that, we know there is at least one miracle, which is the creation of the cosmos. At one point, there was nothing. So if you're an atheist, that's fine. It just means that the universe, all of it, this massive, almost incalculable universe we live in, came into existence out of nothing by nothing. Now, if you're a theist, then you at least grant that the universe came into existence out of nothing by a creator. And that makes a little bit more sense. Either of them, though, are miracles. You have to have a room for at least one miracle in your worldview if you're going to at least pay attention to the consensus of data around cosmology. And there's no reason to assume miracles cannot exist. So if we already concede that the beginning of the universe requires a miracle and miracles are not logically impossible, then it's actually quite close-minded to not leave room for the metaphysical in your worldview. Let's talk about some facts about the resurrection. An author named Gary Habermas, he put together a simple list of facts that are agreed upon almost universally by ancient scholars and historians. These are not just Christian scholars. These are very skeptical scholars, even hardened atheists. Here are some of the things they agree on. To put it in categories, number one, Jesus really died by Roman crucifixion, and later his body was really found missing. Number two, a large number of people claimed they had post-mortem experiences of Jesus. Number three, the people who experienced the supposedly risen Jesus had their lives drastically transformed and gave their lives to start a movement that reshaped our world forever. There's the problem of a missing body and where it went. Now, all kinds of theories have been put forward. None of them have any historical credibility or corroboration, but atheists who desperately want to get rid of the very inconvenient historical fact of the missing body of Jesus have said that maybe the disciples stole the body, or maybe Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He just seemed to die and he was actually alive and was able to make his way out of the tomb. If you investigate the claims of atheism to try and get around the missing body, even famous atheists like Alex O'Connor will say, these are really weak arguments. They're really a stretch far past Occam's razor. Then there are hundreds of people who are said to have had a real post-mortem experience of Jesus. Now, some have said this is something like group psychosis. They're all just hallucinating in mass. And yet, We know that's not how hallucinations work. Hallucinations are defined locally within your own psyche and your own neurology. For a dozen people or a few hundred people to all experience the exact same thing, it can't be a hallucination. And this isn't just some kind of spirit or ghost or phantom, because they saw Jesus do things like actually sit down and eat food. They all heard him speaking the same words. And not only did they believe this, they believed this so much that they willingly gave their lives in order to not recant from this. So there's all kinds of grand conspiracies about how Jesus never rose, and his disciples, who we know were complete cowards the night that Jesus was arrested, all of a sudden got it inside their heads that they would steal his body, or Jesus never really died. So they would start this movement. And typically conspiracies are to leverage power and influence. What happened to the disciples because of this movement they started? They were persecuted. They were beaten, stoned, imprisoned, starved. All 11 of the disciples who became the apostles ended up being martyred for the faith, except for John. They couldn't kill John. They tried a whole bunch of different ways. They ended up just abandoning him on an island where he died of old age. All of the disciples and many of the early followers were severely persecuted, imprisoned, disowned, run out of the marketplace, many of them even killed because of this movement they started. And the movement, what we call the church, did not start because of a religious book. It didn't start because of a religious leader who pushed it through force, fear, or manipulation. It started from a group of people who so deeply believed that Jesus had come back to life, that they had seen him and experienced him out of the grave, that they were willing to give their lives for it. And this movement went on to spread around the world and to push new teachings and new truths that changed the world forever. I want to share how I ended my sermon on Easter Sunday to try and get across the point that we live in a society in the West built on the resurrection, and yet as a culture, we continue to walk further and further away from belief in the one who was resurrected. So this is what I wrote. Imagine a world where hospitals, orphanages, and universities did not emerge from the drive of early Christian communities to care for the sick and the vulnerable. Consider a reality where the scientific process was not nurtured within the fertile soil of Christian philosophy. Without the belief that the pursuit of knowledge was a means of understanding God's creation, scientific inquiry would have been stifled and progress hindered. Picture a world where moral and ethical frameworks, as well as our modern legal systems, were not influenced by the teachings of Jesus. Christian principles of justice and equality were the guiding light, reshaping the world's understandings of right and wrong, justice and mercy, and the sanctity of human life. Without the foundation of human rights rooted in the belief that all people are created in the image of God, oppression and injustice would have continued to reign unchecked. Prior to the revolution brought by the teachings of Jesus, every culture was divided by race and class and gender. It stands as a fact of history that it was Jesus and his movement alone that reshaped that understanding. Imagine a world where literature and language were not enriched by the timeless stories and profound truths of the Bible. Without the inspiration drawn from biblical narratives, our literary landscape would lack depth and meaning, and our languages might lack the richness of expression that comes from centuries of religious influence. Consider a reality where education systems were not shaped by the belief in the value of knowledge and learning. Without the legacy of Christian scholarship and the establishment of educational institutions, our intellectual pursuits would lack purpose and direction. Reflect on a world where social welfare programs were not motivated by the compassionate teachings of Jesus. Without the imperative to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and care for the marginalized, our communities would lack the spirit of generosity and service that binds us together. The historical reality is undeniable. The reason we have hospitals, orphanages, universities, the scientific process, the Enlightenment, human rights, ethical frameworks of justice, diversity and equality, charities and help ministries, women's and minorities' rights, they all trace back to a movement of people who genuinely believed that a Jewish carpenter named Jesus walked out of a grave 2,000 years ago. You may not believe in the resurrection, but you live in the results of that resurrection every single day. Three facts that you have to contend with. Jesus died and his body actually went missing. There's no plausible means of historically corroborating what happened to it. If the resurrection happened, we know exactly what happened to it. It walked out of the grave. A large number of people claimed they had post-mortem experiences of Jesus, including his own family, who did not believe in him and came to believe in him. His brother James became an eventual martyr for his belief that his big brother was the God of the universe. Number three, the people who experienced the risen Christ started a movement that so profoundly changed the world, we stand on the platform the resurrection built and walk away from the God who created the resurrection. I think those are worth wrestling with. And wherever you're at, if you're a skeptic or an atheist or in a different religious background, at least considering, because if Jesus walked out of the grave, it is the most important point in human history, and it is worth considering whether you should put your faith in Jesus. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTine.